It began with a sound, a deep, loud crack. It was not thunder. It was the sound of something huge breaking apart. Then came a roar, and a dark wave rushed down the street. This wave was not water. It was thick and brown, and it smelled sweet and sick. It moved with a terrible force, swallowing everything in its path. This is a story from a time when even a simple drink could become a monster. To know the fear, you must see the place where it happened. The neighborhood was called St. Giles. It was a dark corner of old London. The streets were small and twisted, always in shadow. The houses were old and falling down. Many poor people lived there, crowded together in small, dark rooms. There was no clean water to drink. Sickness was like a ghost that never left, touching every family. A giant stood over this poor place. It was not a man, it was a brewery. It was called the Horseshoe Brewery, and its dark walls towered over the tiny homes. Inside the brewery were huge wood tanks called vats. They were as tall as 3 houses stacked on top of each other. They held a dark beer called porter. The people below lived their lives in the cold shadow of this giant. Inside the brewery, a monster was slowly waking up. One of the huge vats was very, very full. It held more dark beer than a person could ever drink. The weight of the beer pushed hard on the wood walls and the big iron rings that held it all together. A worker saw the danger. He noticed one of the iron rings was weak and slipping. He told his boss, but nothing was done. The pressure kept building inside the dark tank, silent and unseen by the people below. Then came the crack. An iron ring snapped. It flew off like a shot from a cannon. The wood wall of the giant vat burst open, and a hot, dark wave of beer exploded out. It was a flood, but the horror was not over. The first blast was so strong it smashed into other vats nearby. They broke too. A whole river of dark, sticky death was now free, ready to pour down on the houses below. The metal hoop did not just break, it screamed. A sound of tearing iron echoed through the brewery, a warning no one had time to hear. Then came the deep, angry rumble from the heart of the giant wood tank. The monster was awake. A wave, 15 feet high, burst through the thick brick wall of the brewery. It was not water. It was a dark, warm river of beer pouring into the poor streets of St. Giles. The smell filled the air, thick and sweet and wrong. This was not a slow flood. It moved like a hungry animal, fast and without thought. It picked up pieces of wood, dirt, and street trash. The dark river became a thick, ugly soup of horror, roaring through the narrow lanes. The wave smashed into the weak walls of the houses. Wood splintered, bricks fell. People inside heard a sound like thunder, and then their world was gone, swallowed by the dark tide. Now I will tell you a secret of the dead. In a small, dark basement, a family was gathered. They were sad. They were holding a wake, a party to say goodbye to a little boy who had died just days before. They shared memories in the quiet room, lit by a single candle. Then the wall of the basement did not just crack, it exploded inward. The dark beer flooded the small space in a single, terrible rush. There was no way out. The mother, the father, their friends, all were trapped. Their sad goodbyes were silenced forever, buried together in a cold, dark tomb made of beer and mud. This is the part that chills the soul. People did not just die from the wave hitting them hard. The real horror was quieter. The beer filled their small homes all the way to the ceiling, leaving no air to breathe. A young girl named Hannah and her mother were having tea in their small room. The wave filled their home in seconds. They drowned. They drowned in a river of beer inside their own home. And what happened to the giant who did this? The owners of the brewery were taken to court. They stood before a judge. Everyone waited to hear what would be done for the dead and the broken homes. The company owners were taken to a court. the families of the dead watched. They hoped for some good to come from their pain, but the court said no one was to blame. It was called an act of God. The brewery did not have to pay for the lives it took. The broken homes stayed broken. The empty chairs stayed empty. The grim story was closed, and the families were left alone with their shadows and their loss. But the horror did not end there. In the beer-soaked streets, a new, strange scene began. Some people came out of the darkness with cups and pots. They knelt in the sticky mud. They scooped the dark liquid from the gutters. They drank the same wave that had destroyed their world. They were so poor, they would not let it go to waste. And the names of the dead are mostly forgotten now. Mary, Thomas, and little Hannah. Their ghosts are just whispers. This story is a dark mirror. It is not just about a time long ago. It shows us something true and terrible about our own world, a chilling shadow that still stretches. It shows how big companies can be careless. It shows how the lives of the poor can be washed away, how they can be forgotten in the name of money and power, their homes and lives seen as less important. The monster was not the beer. The monster was a world that did not care if they lived or died, a world that could look at their broken bodies and call it an act of God. That is the deepest horror. So the next time you see a tall new building standing over small old homes, think of St. Giles. Think of the sleeping giant. What pressures are building inside its walls, unseen and unheard, and when it breaks, who will be swept away? Who will be called an accident? Whose lost life will be called an act of God? The same dark questions echo from the past. The past is never dead. It is not even past. It waits in the shadows of our cities, ready to flood our world again. The great brewery was taken to court. The men who owned it stood before a judge. Everyone waited to see what would happen. They wanted to see justice for the dead, but the owners were not punished. The judge said the event was a strange and sad thing. It was called an act of God. This meant no one was to blame for the dark wave. The families of the people who died received nothing. Their homes were gone. Their loved ones were gone. The law gave them no help. The brewery did not have to pay for the lives it took. The business went on. The Horseshoe Brewery kept making beer. The shadow of the great tank still fell on the street. It was a cold reminder of the terror that came from inside. The neighborhood itself started to disappear. The old, poor streets of St. Giles were torn down. New, wider roads were built over the cellars where people had drowned. The city tried to wash away the memory. This buried the story deep. For many years, the London beer flood was mostly forgotten. It became a strange tale, a whisper that was hard to believe. The city moved on, hiding its dark past. The disaster did change one thing for the big breweries. They saw how much money they could lose. They slowly stopped using the giant wooden vats. They learned a lesson about greed. They began to use stronger containers. This was not done to keep people safe. It was done to protect the beer. A lost life was a tragedy, but lost beer was a lost profit. Today, the place where the brewery stood is very different. A theater stands there now. People walk on the same ground where the wave of beer once crashed. They do not know the dark story under their feet, but the shadow of that day remains. It is a chilling story of how something normal can become a monster. It shows how easily the lives of the poor can be washed away and forgotten, worth less than the drink that drowned them.